Thanks for joining us here in Chord Purgatory. I'm J. Dylan Proctor, and here recently there was an incident where a teacher in a junior high school fed a live puppy to a snapping turtle in a science class. I want us to talk about this because this is an area where there's a moral gray area. People can say, well, people eat hamburgers, animals eat each other in nature, and people exploit this moral gray area to really say there is no morality at all. In other words, there is no checks and balances on how we do things, and not just an issue of checks and balances, but there's no reason why something would be appropriate or inappropriate within the classroom. So I want us to talk about this, and this took place in Idaho, and it's worth pointing out that there are the local officials there in Idaho, the wildlife officials. They took the turtle into custody and they actually euthanized the turtle. It was a snapping turtle, one that is not indigenous to that area. It's an invasive species, but that's a whole nother issue. We're not going to talk about the euthanizing of the turtle. We're just going to talk about the puppy being fed to the turtle in the classroom. All right, so again, this took place in Preston, Idaho, and it was a junior science class where this happened. And there's been a lot of different people who have had different sides of this topic. One particular parent told the citizen, "My kids were very upset about the way he is being portrayed in the news." And again, this was a parent talking about the teacher. And again, the parent goes on to say, "I'm outraged at people making the comments they have about him. He spent his whole life showing kids how to care and feed animals." And another student from the area, the Preston, Idaho area, was talking to East Idaho News and made the statement, "He's a cool teacher who really brought science to life. I love his class because he had turtles and snakes and other cool things." And we hear a lot of firsthand language used to describe the teacher, again, people who actually knew him, and then you hear sort of secondhand language used to describe this incident as well. One of the things that really bothers me is there's a lot of people who, again, are second and third hand who are trying to attribute something to the motive of the teacher. I have not interviewed the teacher personally, and I haven't seen anyone interview the teacher personally, so I'm not going to throw away the virtue of the due process and attribute any sort of motive to the teacher. He may have been thinking that it was appropriate to do this or not. I'm not going to go and make a ruling on the teacher. I'm just going to be talking about the actual act of feeding a puppy to a snapping turtle and the issues that happen there. There have been some animal rights activists which have been upset with this, and I don't necessarily agree with some of the arguments that they've been making. I know there was one who had actually filed a complaint about this, tried to have charges pressed and things of that nature. I don't know that that's necessarily the most appropriate thing. Of course, there's been people who have been upset that the turtle was euthanized. Again, we're not going to talk about that, but let's just talk about the idea of feeding a living puppy to a snapping turtle. Why is this different from people eating a hamburger? How is this different from feeding mice to a snake or something like that? Again, this is an incident where there really is a moral gray area, and people are trying to capitalize on this moral gray area to say there's no morality at all. We see this all the time in our society. They say, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing that these things happen. It's not necessarily a good thing that a certain thing happens. And so they say, well, we can't always tell if things are good or bad, so there is no good and bad. That's really a inappropriate response to incidents like this in society. I do think this is different than feeding a snake a mouse, and I would go as far to say it is immoral to feed a living puppy to a snapping turtle, and to do it especially in a junior high setting. And the reason why I say this, and I would not necessarily say this if it was a mouse and a snake, or if it was a guinea pig and a turtle, and I recognize that turtles really are a form of an apex predator. They're towards the top of the food chain, and a lot of people are making the argument, well, it's just a teacher showing kids nature, right? Not so much. I do think this is, again, different from a snake eating a mouse because dogs actually have a purpose. And this is where the moral gray area, I think people recognize this, that dogs have a purpose. And whether you're a dog person or not, unmistakably, people have domesticated dogs. For a long time, we've been living with dogs. Canis lupus familiaris is a particular animal. It's not just a random thing that exists in the world, but in fact, it is something that basically exists as the friends of people or the co-workers of people. Dogs, in essence, they are our friends and our co-workers. Along with cats, I'm not going to say cats are necessarily our co-workers, but cats and dogs have a unique place in society as the fact that they are domesticated and they live with us as our friends. And other animals, which are also domesticated, don't necessarily do this. Take, for instance, cattle and even other domesticated farm animals. You may even talk about hogs or pigs. And yes, I know there are the one-off cases where somebody's got like a horse that comes in their house and they live with it. But by and large, if we look at the service animals in the world, and I know there are always exceptions to this, people try to make out their parakeet to be a service animal or something, but dogs They do a lot for us. There's, police dogs. You have dogs that serve in the military. Dogs do a lot of very service-oriented things. They work with us. And then we also find that they're our pets. They're our friends. And if we look at human history, we can see that we have domesticated dogs for a very specific purpose. They are our friends and our coworkers. They are really a unique species on this planet with a very specific purpose. That being said, when you feed a living puppy, an infant of our friend/coworker species, to a snapping turtle, that's what you're doing. You're feeding an infant of our friend/coworker to a snapping turtle. And that is different than it just happening in nature, because again, that most of the kids, they know people have dogs. A lot of them have puppies. When people see dogs, we react a bit differently to dogs than we do to other animals. If we go outside and somebody sees a wild skunk tearing around in your yard, you're not likely to go out there and try to pick it up and hug it. Though if you've seen somebody put a puppy outside with a ribbon on, you're much more likely to go out there and interact with it. It's just the nature of the game. So it is different because dogs do have a purpose. They have an existential state in our world. They're not just a random thing. And that's why I really see this as being a problem, is so many people, they've been like, it happens in nature, therefore we should have kids watch it. And I'm not saying that we shelter kids unnecessarily, but just because things happen in nature doesn't mean it's appropriate to show in a classroom. I mean, we can teach people about violent crime, and we can learn about violent crime without personally experiencing violent crime. We can teach people about, terrible things that happen, terrible family tragedies, medical tragedies, without just thrusting that in front of children. There's a lot more ways to learn about stuff than to just go to the logical extreme of making those things happen right before your eyes. Anthony?
One thing that I think is, all right, I'm not really concerned about the harshness of what the children might have seen, because if it was any other animal, it wouldn't really matter. Especially, dogs do have a purpose, but children understand this especially well also, which is probably why it would be upsetting for a child to watch an animal kill a puppy.
Yeah.
It's because they know that that's an innocent creature that we have basically bred for a purpose.
Yeah.
And they know that. And everything about like the abstract platonic form of a dog suggests that we're supposed to be its friend, we're supposed to protect it, and all that stuff. And then, feeding the puppy to whatever animal is instantaneously going to break all that down.
Yeah, it does break it down.
That's a whole lot of moral architecture for them.
Yeah, it does. It challenges the fact that we treat our friends and coworkers with a bit of reverence. We have a decency for the people in our lives. Again, tragedies befall people, but we don't go out and create tragedies and say, well, it's part of nature, bad things happen. We just don't do that. It's an inappropriate thing to do. And again, I really think this boils down to dogs have an existential purpose, and also because there is moral gray area. There is the argument to be made that this happens in nature. Again, moral gray area. But at the same time, as we start examining things, asking the question, well, what purpose do dogs have? Just because there is a little bit of moral gray area doesn't mean we throw out all morality, which is what a lot of people really want to do. So I come down on this situation as saying, yes, it is bad to feed the dog to a snapping turtle, and not just because I like dogs. And snapping turtles are neat. They're really mean. They're actually quite tough animals, but that's a whole other issue. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe to our channel. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, at Kingdom of the Logos, and you can find me on Twitter at @JDylanProctor.